Hey, it's Clarice, and before we get started, I want to let you know that Mastering OT Policy in Medicare is officially on sale through November 30th. So if you register before November 30th, you'll receive $35 off and the Adult Rehab Guide as an exclusive bonus gift. Mastering OT Policy in Medicare is my 5-module course where we cover policy essentials, advocacy, as well as Medicare and billing basics. So we're talking everything of a copay versus a coinsurance, the different types of Medicare versus Medicare Advantage. We cover the adult rehab settings from acute all the way through hospice, billing basics, advocacy, and so much more. And the best thing about this course is that it's all on demand. So it takes all the basics that you need to know, puts them into easy to understand in videos that are generally no more than like 15 minutes long. Because I know that you're a busy clinician, but you know that you need to know this information not only to protect your job, but also to provide the best care possible to your patients. So make sure to use the link in the show notes or head to amplifyot.com/Medicare to register before November 30th to take advantage of this exclusive sale and bonus gift of the Adult Rehab Guide. All right, I'll see you in the course, and let's get started. You are capable of learning Medicare policy, and by learning Medicare policy, it sure helps you avoid some of these situations, because if you understand what Medicare covers, what they don't cover, what they're paying for, it is a lot easier to avoid incidentally billing for something or doing something that violates the law. Hi, I'm Clarice Grody, and welcome to the Amplify OT podcast. I'm an occupational therapist by trade and a policy wonk by choice. This podcast is here to help you survive and thrive in the U.S. healthcare system through a better understanding of policy, advocacy, and value-based care. So, let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Amplify OT podcast. It's Clarice, and I'm here to talk to you about compliance. Now, I know compliance is not a word that sparks a lot of excitement in most of you, but it's something that's really important, and it's not just the responsibility of the business owner or the compliance office, but it's also up to us as individual clinicians. Now, compliance basically means that you are just following the action or complying with the policy that's required. So you are following the rules. And not only is following the rules part of, our entire judicial system, but it's also part of the code of ethics and understanding the rules and regulations. And so it's hard to say that you're fully in compliance if you don't understand what those rules are in the first place. One of the main reasons that compliance is so important, because it's important to remember that violating a Medicare policy, it may not seem like a big issue, or you think, oh, it's just Medicare, it's not going to impact my license or my livelihood, and I want you to throw that idea completely out the window because that is exceptionally false. Violating a Medicare policy is not only a possible issue against your license, but it's also a violation of a federal law. Medicare law is federal law. So violation of these policies can cause you jail time, massive fees, as well as a potential loss of your license. And even if you don't lose your whole license, you could potentially lose your Medicare license, which is your ability to bill Medicare, and good luck getting a job in adult rehabilitation if you don't have the ability to bill Medicare. So yes, sometimes it is the larger companies that are held responsible versus the individual therapists, but that doesn't mean that individual therapists are completely immune to being charged with a criminal lawsuit by the Office of Inspector General, because it has happened multiple times. And I want to be clear that I'm not trying to scare anyone or make you panic, but it's because I want to communicate that we need to get rid of this idea that the policy isn't important or that you can just treat a patient and not worry about the money piece, because how Medicare pays for things is actually built into Medicare law. So if you aren't following the reimbursement structures appropriately, then you are potentially violating Medicare law and policy. So with that heartwarming pep talk, let's get back into today's topic. Now, I just did a series of videos on Instagram all about skilled nursing facilities and issues that they faced with compliance and reports and charges that were brought against them by the Office of Inspector General, or the OIG. And it's clear that this information really resonated with a lot of people because, especially with the old RUG system, it was pretty clear when we as therapists were asked to do things that we didn't feel comfortable with in order to optimize reimbursement. It was a common practice, but that doesn't mean that it was legal. Basically, what was happening under the old RUG system, if you provided more therapy, skilled nursing facilities made more money. So they would ask therapists to provide lots and lots of therapy, regardless of what the patient may have needed, in order to receive a higher reimbursement rate underneath the RUG levels. And even though this kind of abuse was definitely rampant under the RUG system, it's still happening. I mean, even the other day, I saw an OIG report talking about a skilled nursing facility getting in trouble for changing Section GG scores in order to make a patient look less functional, in order to receive more money, because CMS pays more money for patients who are less functional than the more functional ones because of how PDPM is structured. But if you want to watch those videos about the sniffs, then go follow me on Instagram at amplify_OT, and all 3 videos are there. But again, I also want to say this definitely isn't just skilled nursing facilities. It happens in home health. It happens in outpatient. It doesn't happen as often in the hospital, at least not affecting OT, because we don't necessarily always directly influence reimbursement in the hospital, but it happens in all settings as well as independent clinics. So SNFs definitely have a bad track record, but it isn't just skilled nursing facilities. So why did these facilities get in trouble? Well, it's because either someone reported them or Medicare became aware of the issue, and these reports were turned into the Office of Inspector General. If you aren't familiar with the OIG, I recommend looking them up, but basically what they are is they describe themselves as the nation's forefront in fighting waste, fraud, and abuse, and improving the efficiency of Medicare, Medicaid, and the more than 100 other Department of Health and Human Services, or HHS, programs. They also happen to be the largest part of the Inspector General's office within the federal government and have over 1,600 personnel. So that's a lot of people who are fighting, basically, healthcare waste and fraud. So one of the main ways that therapy practitioners tend to find themselves on the wrong side of the law is with the False Claims Act. Now, there are a couple other ways, especially like the anti-kickback statute, but I'll save talking about the anti-kickback statute for like another video because it's a whole other can of worms. But what we're going to talk about today is the False Claims Act. Now, this act sounds pretty straightforward. Basically, you violate the act if you submit a false claim. But what a lot of practitioners think about when they think of a false claim, they think about submitting something that didn't actually happen. And yes, that would be an obvious violation of the FCA. So if you say that you provided therapy, so let's say you bill Medicare for a 30-minute session, but that 30-minute session never occurred, that would be a very clear, obvious potential violation of the False Claims Act. But the ones that people more often get in trouble for are not exactly that blatant. Another fun fact about the False Claims Act is that whoever successfully brings forward an issue and the government is able to receive a recovery, the person who brought forward the issue gets a portion of that recovery. This is also what we most commonly call whistleblowing. And this isn't just a tiny little rinky-dink kind of law. The Department of Justice actually reported that they have attained back more than $5.6 billion in settlements from civil cases just in the fiscal year 2021. And to be clear, I don't mean that they've received $5.6 billion like since they started in the 70s. I mean that for the fiscal year of 2021 total, so 12 months, they received $5.6 billion back in settlements and judgments for civil issues involving the False Claims Act. And over $5 billion of those dollars were because of matters related to healthcare. So again, not a tiny little rule violation. This happens a lot. I'll be right back after this break to talk about whether or not CMS cares that you didn't know that you violated the law, and give you some other examples of common ways that occupational therapy practitioners find themselves on the wrong side of Medicare. If you're thinking about starting a podcast, then there's nothing I can recommend more than Anchor by Spotify. It's what I use to run the Amplify OT podcast, and if there's anything that I love more about it, it's that it's completely free. And as a small business owner, I am all about free resources. Anchor makes it super easy to have a podcast by having everything in one place. That means recording, that means sharing it on other podcast apps, and that also means ads and subscription services. So if you're ready to get your message out there, then head right now to download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today. You know and I know that you need CEUs every single year in order to maintain your license, and I always recommend not only taking intervention-based CEUs, but also some policy-based ones, and there is no better place to do that than MedBridge. I partnered with MedBridge to give you the best discount possible, so that way you can access those CEUs that you need to keep your license, as well as ones that'll actually help you advance your career. By using the code AMPLIFYOT at checkout, you save 40% on your annual subscription, or you can also use our affiliate link that's linked in the show notes. And one more time, that's code AMPLIFYOT for 40% off your annual subscription. Another important thing to note about the False Claims Act is that oftentimes intent is not considered when prosecuting this law. So that means that if it is reasonable that you should have known that you were violating the law, they can still prosecute it. So just because you say, I didn't know that was wrong, doesn't mean that the person is immune from being prosecuted underneath the FCA. And if someone or a facility is found guilty of violating the False Claims Act, they may be responsible for fines up to 3 times the program's losses, plus $11,000 per claim filed. So as you can imagine, that adds up. That's why most of these OIG cases are for hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. And so under the FCA, they define knowing to include not only actual knowledge, but also instances in which the person acted basically in deliberate ignorance or kind of a recklessness. So basically, you didn't do any of your own due diligence to look up what the law actually required. You just followed what someone else told you to do or whatever it may be. That means you didn't do your due diligence in ensuring that you were complying with policy, so you can still be prosecuted under the False Claims Act. So especially if you are starting your own therapy business, you need to make sure that you know some of these laws in and out. In addition to the financial pain that you'd feel for violating the False Claims Act, it can also come along with criminal time. So that means you could potentially go to jail and be imprisoned with violations of the False Claims Act, and that does occasionally happen. So with all of that fun information, you may be wondering what exactly constitutes a false claim. Now, first and foremost, like we said, submitting a claim for something that just didn't happen, obviously a violation of the false claim. But one of the ones that tends to be a bigger issue, especially for therapists, is when a claim is submitted for something that isn't covered by Medicare. So meaning the therapist or a skilled nursing facility or whomever submitted a claim to be reimbursed for a service that didn't meet Medicare coverage criteria of primarily being reasonable, skilled, and necessary. So that means that the service provided has to check kind of those 3 boxes. So it means that medical necessity piece, it's reasonable and necessary for that patient's condition, and it must be skilled. So if you're billing for services that aren't skilled or don't fall into that reasonable and necessary category, then you could be potentially submitting a false claim, which is the primary reason that most of these skilled nursing facilities got in trouble, was for submitting a claim for services that either maybe weren't provided or that didn't meet the coverage criteria of being reasonable, necessary for that patient's condition, and skilled. Another way that some people fall in trouble with the False Claims Act is for submitting claims for services where appropriate supervision was not provided. And this is especially important in private practice. So under Medicare Part B, in private practice, occupational therapy assistants as well as physical therapy assistants have to receive direct supervision. That means that the supervising OT or PT has to be on site and available for direct supervision. It doesn't mean they necessarily have to be in the room, but they have to be directly available on site. So you can't be providing virtual supervision like you might be under Part A, where you can provide general supervision. So private practice has completely separate supervision requirements. Now, obviously, there are some exemptions currently under the public health emergency, but assuming that the public health emergency isn't happening, direct supervision of OTAs and PTAs is required within Medicare Part B for private practice. So, if appropriate supervision was not provided, and then a claim was submitted to get that service covered, then that would be a violation of the False Claims Act potentially, because you were submitting for a service that wasn't covered because you didn't meet the appropriate criteria for coverage, which includes supervision laws. And the other way that I'll mention is definitely not as common, but does happen, is if you submit a claim for a service that you provided while you were not licensed. So let's say a license lapsed or you forgot to renew it, whatever the case may be, and you provided a service to a patient and then you filed a claim for that to receive reimbursement. Technically, that would be a potential violation of the False Claims Act because you submitted for a service while you were not licensed, which means that the service isn't covered because Medicare only covers services, at least from an occupational therapist or physical therapist or whomever, if they are a licensed clinician. So submitting for a claim without a license would be a potential violation of False Claims Act, not to mention numerous other laws that would be potentially violated both at the state and federal level. But at least for this scenario, it would potentially be a violation of the False Claims Act. Now, this is definitely not an exhaustive list of all the different potential possible creative ways that someone could violate the False Claims Act, but it gives you a pretty good idea of the fact that it doesn't just mean filing for a service that wasn't provided. It can be filing for services that aren't covered, whether you knowingly or unknowingly filed a claim that was not covered by Medicare. So again, to tie it back to my whole shtick, understanding Medicare reimbursement and policy is important to help prevent you from violating a False Claims Act incidentally. Now, since I like to end these podcasts with just a smidge of a ray of sunshine, I will go ahead and tell you that you are capable of learning Medicare policy. And by learning Medicare policy, it sure helps you avoid some of these situations. Because if you understand what Medicare covers, what they don't cover, what they're paying for, it is a lot easier to avoid incidentally billing for something or doing something that violates the law. And helping practitioners and students like yourself understand what Medicare covers, what they're paying for, Medicare policy and health insurance policy is the entire reason why I put together my Mastering OT Policy and Medicare course. Now I know, how original, right? Promoting my own course on my own podcast. But I will tell you, I would not support this course and I would not put it out if I didn't think it was high quality and if I wasn't proud of the work that went into it. I am so excited seeing the results from practitioners and students who have been taking this course. I've had students contact me and tell me that they finally are starting to feel prepared for their fieldwork and for their first job. Practitioners who say that even just after watching a few videos, they're already feeling smarter. And I love that because personally, as a new grad, I definitely got told to do things that at the time I didn't realize was illegal. And that was a violation of Medicare policy because I just didn't know, right? And at that time, you just kind of want to do what your boss says, and you don't really want to think that your boss is going to tell you to do something that's not allowed. But had I known then what I know now, I definitely would have been able to reduce my risk, and I definitely would have been able to better advocate for myself and for my job. So head to the link in the show notes or to my website and look for Mastering OT Policy and Medicare. It is a 5-hour on-demand course. It is not your typical CEU course where you're getting all this information that you may or may not need to know and it's someone just reading from slides to a room that you're not in. It is me talking directly to you through easy to understand on-demand videos. I cut out all the extra stuff and gave you just what you need to know in videos that generally are no more than about 15 minutes. So head to the link down below in the show notes for Mastering OT Policy and Medicare if you want to learn how Medicare actually pays for your services and avoid being in one of these situations. All right, that's it for me today. I will see you next time, and thank you again so much for listening to the Amplify OT podcast.
Thank you so much for listening to the Amplify OT podcast. Hey, did you know that I have a free newsletter? Yes, that is correct. In addition to the free podcast, the free articles, I also have a free newsletter, and you can subscribe using the link in the show notes. This way, you will never miss an update. If you love this podcast, I have 2 requests. First, please consider leaving us a 5-star review, and second, consider leaving a gift using the link in the show notes so that I can continue to support this podcast and provide this resource for free. Consider it a gift to your future self. And if you don't love the podcast, well, I hope you just have a fantastic day and forget I said anything about that review. Okay, folks, keep speaking out and speaking often, and I'll catch you next time.